thank you all guys for joining me here today in conversation regarding Mashura, which is an exhibition taking place at the end of July. You'll all be participating. I'm very excited about that. And alongside about 15 other artists as well. So I wanted to invite you all to kind of have a conversation about the underlying themes of the exhibition, why you felt it was something that you'd want to participate in, and what Mashura, which means to seek advice, means to you as artists. So maybe Hasan, you can
start. Well, it's a real privilege to be around everyone here today, and I'm constantly seeking advice, especially in my art practice. This for me was a great opportunity, or something new to be part of an exhibition where the majority is Muslim artists. And I think as Muslim artists, we share this commonality of kind of understanding what is allowed or what is not allowed in Islam, and how we try to kind of better ourselves as being artists. As Muslims, we find strength. We search for strength within each other, and I think once we surround ourselves in that environment, we feed off each other. So for me, this was a great opportunity to meet other Muslim artists, because there are just so few, and I think we're so isolated and private. We don't go out there and advertise ourselves. And so just to meet fellow creatives and feed off their creativity, feed off their ideas and their challenges, it makes you feel like you're not alone. And this is something new. And when you mentioned that you were going to try and establish something like this, I was immediately involved, because I thought it's about time that someone had the bravery and guts to actually do something like this. So hopefully it's the start of something amazing.
I remember when we started to have the conversations, it was before lockdown, and I'd been speaking to you for quite some time, and I said I'd been working within the area of visual literacy and art advocacy in the Muslim communities, and I remember speaking to Hasan, and you said, no, just do it. And I said, but what does this actually mean? How will it come together? It's an exhibition which is focusing on Muslim visual culture, but what does that even mean? And how do we define that? And is it going to be a landmine? And I think the way that it's evolved has been a very interesting process. And, as we say, Mashura means to seek advice, to seek counsel. And the artists in the show are so different. And, obviously, your practices here, as you're sitting around, it's so individual. Sahlah, you and I worked together recently on a show. You graduated in December. Yeah. So how would you say that your experience has been as an artist that's coming out on the scene, working within an area, because your work looks at the Muslim community, but your experience of it and your family's experience of it, and you speak about Malaysia. Yeah. So how would you say this exhibition is beneficial to the overall cause?
Yeah, I think for me, that the idea of Mashura as being a way of seeking advice, my work as growing up as sort of making art, it was a voice for me, and it was that place where I could ask questions and I could feel sort of, maybe I couldn't express myself the way I felt I could maybe in life. And it became that language. And, Islam is a way of life, and you grow up I grew up in quite a traditional Islamic household, very supportive of the arts, thankfully, but also in a secular space. And navigating that is it's hard sometimes when you're growing up in a space like that. And art became that place of seeking advice, and also allowing to ask those questions and navigating them and becoming a form of introspection. So working with materials that my grandmother would have used as a seamstress, and understanding that Islam, especially in the Cape, stands at that intersection of both religion and politics. Yeah. And in order to understand our cultural and traditional upbringing is to understand that collision. I think that was for me.
And sort of defining what Islamic art or Muslim art really means, I think, is really a point of contention, because there's so much misunderstanding and misinterpretation, I know, in curatorship, in terms of archiving. So all of these factors, I think, really do come to the forefront. I know as a curator, when I was putting the show together or seeking artists, one of the things that really stood out for me was I suppose the sparsity of it, the fact that there were all these artists, but there wasn't really a collectiveness. And it really was something that was quite surprising to me. And I think coming from where I'd come from, I thought there's something needs to be done about it, because I think we'll continue to have those misunderstandings. And I know as a curator, I was facing things such as, certain things are too Muslim or certain, and it really used to, I've spoken about this with you guys before, that it really bothered me, because I thought, why is that? What does that even mean for something to be too Muslim? And how does that work in the space of arts? Because it's supposed to be the space that you can have the most freedom of being who you are. Nabeeha, I wanted to actually come to you because your work takes a completely different angle. So I'd say you wouldn't really categorize it as Islamic arts or Muslim arts. It's you. It's speaking about your lived experience as growing up as a female of colour in South Africa, but also having to assimilate to a culture here that you have to kind of grapple with. So I wanted to just kind of for you to speak about that a little bit.
So, I mean, when you first approached me about the exhibition and about it being a collective of Muslim artists, I had hesitation to involve myself in the project because, and I wanted to understand that hesitation, and I think it came from feeling it was a bit of like an imposter syndrome kind of thing, in that I wasn't sure if I fully identified as being a Muslim artist. And then I came around to understand that it's a lot about my work, what my work is about. The reason that I wouldn't say I fully identified in that is that I grew up in quite a mixed background. My dad is Muslim, but my mother grew up Roman Catholic.
Okay.
And so our household, whilst both religions and cultures were celebrated and encouraged in the household, we weren't necessarily very, it wasn't enforced by any means. Any religious practices weren't particularly enforced. So whilst my younger brother grew up quite religious, I didn't really have a strong affiliation with the religion. And I think it was definitely as a result of being in a predominantly white school and assimilating, as you mentioned, to that white culture. It's only in my later years that I started taking on my identity, or taking ownership of my identity more. But I've always existed in that space where I've never felt somewhat coloured enough, or Indian enough, or Catholic enough, or Muslim enough. And so that's why it felt almost fraudulent to accept myself into this space. But again, I think what is exciting for me is working amongst a group of artists who I do want to take on that identity. I do believe it is it's sincere to my identity. So I feel like this is an opportunity for me to learn more about it and really immerse myself more in what it means to me to be Muslim.
So I wanted to just elaborate on a point that Nabeeha made about feeling the imposter syndrome, and also I wanted to kind of connect that to an area of work that I studied Islamic art history, and so I've kind of delved into the very traditional side of Islam and what that means. And I remember having a professor at university who said there's no such thing as Islamic arts. She was an Egyptian professor, and she was very hell-bent on saying no, there wasn't. But she said creativity was always existent from the advent of Islam. So what's always been interesting is this question of what is Islamic art, and what does that mean for young Muslim artists, for artists who are on the periphery, who have been raised within the culture of Islam, in the Muslim culture, because it's a culture and a way of life as well as it is a religion. And I think that's where it can get confusing for people, especially for people who are not from that culture. And I wanted to kind of discuss that with you a little bit, is that you came to Islam you sort of reverted to Islam when you were quite young. And so as an artist and as a person, you have a multitude of different identities that you kind of brought together. So I wanted for you to maybe just elaborate on that in terms of the practice of what Islamic art is and how Muslim arts
Sure. First, I wanted to thank Sahlah, it's Hasan Hussein. Hasan.
I'm going to get confused between the two.
So I just wanted to thank everybody for being here, and the camera crew, and anyone who's watching, and just say Assalamu alaikum to everybody, and thank you for this opportunity. I really hope that this this is a small seed that can grow abundantly, change things for a lot of people. I embraced Islam when I was 9 years old, and shortly after that I moved to the United States and lived just as an American, as a normal Westerner, completely secular, because there were no Muslims around me. So while I had this consciousness of having embraced Islam, and while I was aware of the duality that was sort of going on inside me, I followed everything that the secular world values. I followed it to a dead end. And I think that a lot of people in the secular world are beginning to wake up to the fact that there's nothing at the end. There's nothing at the end of materialism. There's nothing at the end of freedom as they understand it. And so at a certain point, I think that the world is coming to terms with what is happening. I mean, I think that personally I use nature as a means of expression within my practice, and so intrinsically I believe that nature is it's a poetic source of enlightenment that speaks to us, and we're destroying nature. And so that in and of itself is telling us that whatever path we're on is not the right path, and it's not a path that leads to any real satisfaction or real rida. In Islam, the term rida is total satisfaction with what you have and in who you are. Allah says in the Quran that the inhabitants of Jannah are the people who experience rida, those who are satisfied with their Lord, and Allah is satisfied with them. That is the utmost, greatest thing that we can attain in life, in this life and hereafter. And I think that Mashura is a really great title for this, because it allows us to explore the terms and define the terms within the cultural expression that we experience as Muslims. Whether you are someone who came from a Muslim family and found their way into secular life, or embraced Islam and then went through secularism and back to Islam, or whether you're born Muslim or whatever it might be, it's an important expression, because I think there are other people like us who resonate and mirror our experience, and so we're able to give them an opportunity to say, oh, I see this thing that transcends the doctrine, it transcends the dogma, it transcends what people are saying, and that's the nature of art, is that art transcends doctrine, right? It gives you an experience of what it might actually be like. And so I sort of divide it into two separate terms. There's Muslim art and then there's Islamic art. So Islamic art falls into the category of the sacred, and it is the manifestation of the sacred in existence. And then Muslim art is it's the expression of the cultural aspects of what it means to be Muslim. What it's like to be Muslim under certain contexts, within certain governments, within certain countries, within certain languages, whatever it might be. And both are very, very important. And both play an extremely important role in identifying and sort of resonating with people who are in certain walks of life, and who are in certain points on the path of their journey. So yeah.
And I think it brings it back again to the term of Mashura, which was something, growing up as a Muslim myself in London, coming from a multicultural background, my family's from Pakistan, and going through that experience of being a Muslim raised in a secular country and having to wear lots of different hats, and then going through the art world, and then having to work through those complexities. And again, like you said, an imposter syndrome as well, because you feel like you can be in a certain environment, but you have to kind of diffuse and diminish who you are in order to take that space and to hold that space.
Yeah, but I think that's very unfortunate. And it's mostly unfortunate because Islam is beautiful. There's a hadith of Muhammad that says, Allah is the most beautiful and Allah loves beauty, you know. So what does that tell you? It tells you that anything that is not the most beautiful is not sincerely Islamic. And so you can work backwards from the highest forms of dignity and the highest forms of expression and find your way sort of down the hierarchy of expression. And like I said, they're all important in different ways. But, you know, Islam is so beautiful, and people are waking up to that. You know, it's becoming a reality for people, and people are waking up to maybe a narrative that is not, you know, the Fox News narrative, and the narrative that is not what mass media is telling them, and they're realizing that you know, there's a lot of political things that go on that cause a particular group of people to be stigmatized and looked down upon. I mean, in the 70s and the 80s, it was Russian communists. And, you know, in the first 20 years of the 2000s, it was Muslims. And, you know, I mean...
I just wanted to take that point because I wanted to speak to you, Hasan, because I was thinking of your practice for you and your brother the last sort of more than a decade, actually. You've been in the arts scene for a while. Your work deals with a lot of different issues of the lived experience of Muslims, from the political to...
And that's what I was also picking up, you know, like Islam is a beautiful religion, but we were raised to believe, and this was taught by our elders, our teachers, that representing the figure or sculpting is completely haram. That's forbidden. So as a young child, you know, my closest family members, my teachers at madrasa, my parents, they were telling me that this is not allowed in Islam. So that's what we've been taught, you know. So if you want to paint to make a picture, it has to be calligraphy or that sacred text that we were speaking about. So growing up, it was a challenge because, like you said, you know, you're trying to navigate this. You know, you want to please your religion because you love it. At the same time, you want to fit into this kind of secular world that you're living in. So there's this constant conflict because you look at the Western things, all these beautiful artworks, and I want to leave my legacy in that kind of shape and form. But at the same time, I don't want to go against what I've been taught and people that I love. So, and I think that's what motivated the technique that I developed at university, where using photography, which was a fairly new medium.
Right.
So it was still like in Islam, there's not a lot of text or things. Like for sculpture, is completely haram, right? So you can't represent the figure in any sculptural form.
But then at the same time, if we really dive deep into that, would you argue with a scholar that tells you can't take a stone and sculpt it into some abstract form, but I love my BMW, you see, because the purpose of that understanding is so that we don't attribute superstition to anything. So we understand that a stone is a stone. We understand that a car is a car. You know? And so these abstract forms, whatever meaning we give it, is just implicit in the item. We don't apply superstition to anything, you see. That's where it comes from. Our religion is pulling us away from superstition, away from assumption, away from suspicion, and just trying to make things as clear-cut and simple as physically possible. And I would argue that most people, most Muslims, will love their BMW, their Mercedes, their Bugatti, their GTI more than the average art collector will love a sculpture in their house. And that's what it's really all about, right? Because sincerity in Islam is really about love. If you love Allah and if you love the Nabi Muhammad, then your sincerity will follow that love. And the Quran is pointing in one direction only. It's saying, don't love anything more than you love Allah. And if you do, then you need to look at yourself and you need to consider some things. And so for me, even that idea of, sculpture being haram, I think there's a context even within sculpture of it being halal. Like Sahlah, for example, Sahlah makes chairs. That's a sculptural piece.
So what is allowed is that anything at the figure that you will be asked to blow a loop into it. Right? But there's this hadith that says that anything in the Greek is in nature or the abstract, then that is made halal, permissible, right? So also with avoiding when we're painting portraits, idealizing, it's all protecting us from. And today we have celebrities that we idolize in the
It's really interesting that we're kind of touching on these things because we are amongst popular culture.
Yeah.
And in Nabeeha's your work always touches on that as well. And you've grown up in this popular culture, so this is something that we have to kind of grapple with. I wanted to move on to representation and experiences of representation as well, because often we forget about the audiences themselves, and when we're speaking within the art world, we have many different viewers coming to see our work, and how we are represented or how artists are represented, and how you're curated actually, and then how the audience's engagement is with your work as well. So Nabeeha, I actually wanted to go to you to discuss what your experience of that has been and how you've kind of navigated that, or have there been times where you've been
I've been fairly happy with, in terms of how my work has been represented or in spaces that it's been curated. I think, if anything, where I don't see it, it signifies blind spots to me in my own work when it's not defined in certain ways. It shows me where I'm failing to articulate something in a way, or failing to articulate my identity, or because my work is a lot about my identity. And so I suppose I take my cue from that where it's not seen.
That's interesting, because I find, particularly when it comes to audiences, I'm going to come to you, Hasan, and then I'm going to come to you, is that the conversations that we've had in the past in terms of the reception of your work. And I think that's something that even as a curator I grapple with, because again, we come back to, we can speak about all these things, but then it comes down to when work is too confronting. It's too uncomfortable. And I know Abdus, you're also speaking about very similar terms in terms of why is it that work is perceived as too religious or too anything when it's just it's being authentic, it's just speaking, right? And so, Hasan, I wanted to maybe speak to you in terms of your experience globally as an artist and the reception of your work, and maybe touch on some of that, really.
Whenever I'm making work, I always try to keep the audience at the back of my mind, because when we my brother and I are creating these photographs, we are taking little bits and pieces and putting it together, composing this image, and we're trying to put enough information in the image that people from all different backgrounds can get some gist of what we're trying to say.
Yeah.
And surprisingly, there are, especially people that come from religious homes, I'm talking about all major religions, they are all dealing with this kind of duality, coming from living in a secular environment. So when they see our work that deals with this kind of East and West tension, they can relate to it.
Yeah.
A majority of the people that visit galleries and exhibitions and art fairs, museums, majority are non-Muslim. That's the reality, right? So the majority of people that sees my work are non-Muslims, but we are making, or at least my intention when I make the work is for Muslim people. It's quite ironic. But at the end of the day, people they engage with the work, they read the work according to what they understand. Some of them really opens their mind and creates a completely new narrative for them, which is a success. Now, we had an exhibition in Dubai, for example. This was the first Muslim country where we showed our work, and the gallerists had to get a local to come in before the opening to have a look at the work to see if it was okay.
Okay.
It was quite hectic because
I remember you sharing this. It's quite interesting.
And then when you looked at the work and things, there was quite some of the things was pretty hectic. It was dealing with also like they had some sheer aspects to it. But at the end of it, he gave it like the thumbs up, and then she was like, okay, I'm okay. Like, let's have the exhibition. So that is interesting, you know. And then there's people that really didn't like the work, that just was offended by the images, and but comes down to that intention, and I truly believe that if the intention is good, it comes out in the work, and people feed off it. You know, it's this invisible thing that is there, and I live by that, and I make art by that. And if anyone does challenge it, I know that it came from a good place. So I can stand up for it and debate it as long as I need to defend. Because at the end of the day, you are defending your art. You're putting it up there, and people can be really harsh. You know, they can be ugly also. And you need to know what you're doing. And so having that intention is important.
I think so, and I think it's your narrative, isn't it? It is your narrative, and if it's not told truthfully, then I don't think it's doing justice to art practice. You know, Sahlah, I know that we recently worked on an exhibition of a body of work that you did, which was exhibited for the first time, and that I wanted to kind of just go back to was an interesting process for me as a curator, working with you and listening to the engagement that had occurred with your work. And it's not very confronting, your work, but at the same time it's uncomfortable because you use needles and you know, it kind of takes the place of embroidery, right? How was that for you to have people engaging with your work? And what was that experience like for you?
Well, I'll speak plainly, it was really scary. It was. I think when you make work that stands at that intersection, there's a big possibility that you can offend. And like you said, that's not your intention as an artist to do that. That is your own journey of questioning, your own journey of creating a work. And especially in terms of the Cape Muslim community and the Cape Malays, which is the wrongful term, that stands at that intersection between Cape Malay religious undertones, Cape relating to like the actual area. And so my work really, it tries to understand that blend, and when you do so, there is possibilities that you could possibly, it's a scary thing to work through, because like you said, there are a lot of people who maybe don't interact with art often, and it is confronting in that sense. I think, you know, dealing with the idea of Malayism as an overarching conceptual theme, it is a history that we have to confront. And, you know, in my thesis I talk about what does it mean for the oppressed to oppress the oppressed. And it's the idea of understanding that as much as we all come from a religious and cultural background, that within a political stance that there was turmoil. And that turmoil exists within who we are and within an identity. And to truly become part of a community and accept who you are as an individual is to dissect that. And some people, you know, don't like that. You know, not dissecting something is sometimes easier. And my work was that process of doing that. And it is scary, as you know, as a Muslim youth, as a woman, you know, like there's a lot of assumptions that come along with not just you as an artist, but as you as a person. So, you know, not wearing a scarf, does that make me more or less Muslim? No, that doesn't. You know, does wearing a scarf make me a radical? No, that doesn't. And working through that, I guess that divide is really important to me, and it is scary because it is a part of you that you're basically putting out there.
I remember when we were working on your installation, and this is quite poignant actually for me, because I really wanted to bring it up when you touched on that, is that it was to do with the masala, the prayer mat, and you had quite a lot of prayer mats in your installation, and when we finally put the show up, we only included one prayer mat in the overall. Obviously, it was kind of space cognizant as well, but there was another element of it, which we never really discussed, but it was the element of the audio that came with it, which was a layered azan, call to prayer, and it was turmoil, and it was discussions and communications going on, and it was a layered audio that plays over it. And one of the things I wanted to touch on was the decision not to have that playing during the day or for audiences coming in. I wasn't completely comfortable with that because I felt that that was part of your installation and that would, but it was still a conscious decision on my side to not have it played during the day because I was conscious that people may be uncomfortable with it. Again, just speaking about the imagery and the objects and the things that form part of the identity, why are those confronting? Why would a masala be? You know, it's really how you perceive it. So those are things that I think that really come up a lot. I know in curating it comes up a lot. I have to deal with a lot of pushback at times in terms of how many Muslim artists or Muslim artists in shows I'm doing. And that's something that really makes me question again. I have to ask the question, why is that? What is it about someone's name that is making someone uncomfortable? There's been instances where the artist wasn't even Muslim. And I've had to hear, there's too many Muslim names.
But that's been a critique, there's too many Muslim names.
Yeah. It's a thing. It really is a thing. And I half want to laugh at it because I think, is this conversation happening? What does this conversation mean? Because it's not elaborated on.
No one really ever says there's too many white names in a group show.
Exactly. And I think that's the thing that's coming up a lot for me as a curator. I know we've been speaking as artists, but as a curator, where I'm trying to be authentic to the narratives that are coming out, and then these things are coming up and I'm having to be challenged on them and have answers for them. And so in a way, why Mashura came about was because of those experiences. I've been in Cape Town for 5 years, and I had kind of looked at how arts within the Near and Middle East, contemporary and traditional, had advanced, and there wasn't really a lot going on here, but there was so much talent. And so each and every one of the artists, it was kind of like, you know, a collection of artists that came together. And I thought, in a sense, this exhibition forms a statement to say that, you know, it's strength in numbers and it is collective, but also to form a support for artists that are going through that individually. And it really got me thinking, because I thought, well, if I'm going through it as a curator, surely artists are. And every single one of the artists I'd obviously engaged with over the last few years and had those discussions, because then you don't feel so alone in that process.
I think Hasan mentioned it earlier about how isolated we are because there aren't many of us. I think part of the isolation is also because our audience, in terms of our Muslim community, really aren't that engaged. I mean, I know I feel that from geographically. Look, I'm separated from my Muslim family who are mostly in Johannesburg. But they don't have much engagement with my work. I don't get to discuss my work with them ever. And I mean, I guess this is also the first time I'm thinking about it. I do make work that includes is representational, includes portraiture. So I'm not sure whether that is perhaps offensive to them on some level. But again, we can go back to the idea of intention. It's having those conversations, because if we're not having the support from the community, then who are our audiences? Exactly. Again,
and it's so new. I would say it's so new. There's so much that we need to explore and understand, and like push the boundaries. If you want, like at the intention that you have good intention, make it, do it, and then only we learn from our mistakes.
Let's have a discussion.
And that's also the way I've been trying to find that balance. Putting up, and people get to see it, but that's why I was so drawn to this group, because I, being part of the Goodman for so many years, there is no Muslim artists on that group. So whenever I would go and engage with them, there was no one I could really connect with who understood what I was going through. And when I made some visits to Michaelis and I met some Muslim students, I immediately had a connection with them and share experiences. And I think that's what we need more of. We needed our Muslim artists to be connected in a way where it's a phone call, come visit, having studio visits, engaging. Oh, I'm working on a new bodywork. I would love for you to come and have a look at it and give me some feedback, because that's what's going to make us stronger.
That is exactly.
That's what other artists have. They have people coming and critiquing, because now we make the work and then we put it up and then it's too late. But if we had, for example, you came in and you saw something in that process, then the art will become so much more than just me. Then it really becomes Muslim lot because.
So I think we have three major things that are up against us. One is our isolation, as you mentioned before. Two is the narrative of the last 2 decades of secular world sort of speaking out, and stigmatizing Islam and making it difficult for Muslims to just exist within the secular world. And then the third is the narrative of the gallery. Oftentimes the narrative of the gallery is driven in a particular, very, very niche point. They have these meetings, they have these discussions, they say, okay guys, what's our direction? They have statements and they stay really, really particular and really true to it. And then even when sometimes the hand will change and all of a sudden the gallery is run by someone else or owned by someone else, then everything sort of changes once more. And so those three things are really what we're up against. And inshallah, we'll find a way. I think it's not impossible, and I think that Islam is such a universal. We deal with such universal principles that to communicate the most universal principles, things that people can't necessarily argue with, that makes it easier. But then on the other hand, some people are also very interested in the cultural, peripheral things.
And
I think that's
what
also
I say
relevant,
is that we need our Muslim community's support.
Yeah.
We need support of big Muslim-owned businesses, people that can fund what arts within our community. I mean, we've seen something small from Safia, for example, and the academia, and that really try to start something. It's also funded quite humbly and trying to give artists that are not necessarily have studied the arts but have now practiced at home and to give them an opportunity and a space to show work. And I think that's what we need. We need the backing from our community. We need their interest, their support, because remember, if someone buys your art, they are supporting you to carry on. If no one buys your work, you can go nowhere.
And I think collecting is something that supports that, and that's something that we have to educate and teach on what collecting actually means. You were speaking about the gallery, I just wanted to touch on that point, is that there are alternative spaces outside of galleries that can be made and that can be created, because it's about having autonomy of your narrative and also your audience as well, in a way, and that's something that can be nurtured as well. We're at a very, I would say, an infancy with the art market in South Africa. It's quite young anyway. So the fact that you're at this point now means that ahead you've got so many potentials that you can explore. Maybe this exhibition is a starting point for something. But it does have to come from yourself, really, and then you're in that position where you can as artists and you are doing it. And I think just by having taken that step into the arts as individuals, you've already taken that first step.
Yeah, and I think the difficulty is refine your practice. You learn, you come to know the curators, you come to know the gallerists, you come to know the collectors. You understand that the collectors are basically caretakers. Their position is they are there to take care of your art, to make sure that it doesn't get wet, to make sure it doesn't get damaged. They take care of it, they speak about it, they embellish upon it, they share it with people. And the process of getting to collectors, the process of getting to that point, that refines your practice, and it really just, it's a cohesive, holistic experience, and it takes time, and it takes patience, and it takes sincerity, and inshallah, things will get easier. At least we can deal with the isolation part. We might not be able to deal with the global narrative or the
isolation part.
But we can help each other by being a community that supports each other in many
I wanted to make just one point, and it was something also Nabeeha mentioned, and I'm just consolidating a lot of your different viewpoints, is that once you have conviction in what you're doing, and your feet are firm on the ground, and you don't feel the need to be diminished or silenced or quietened, that's when real change really happens, because you stand really firm in your narrative. Until that happens, you always allow yourself to diminish, and I think that this is something for us to kind of consider as creatives, that if someone says your work is to something, question why that is, ask why that is, because it could be something that you could learn from, it could be something that they could learn from. And it's all those interactions that will help along the way. I tried to do that in my practice, and I felt that Mashura was my response to my curatorial practice. This was kind of a response, it really was. And I didn't know what the outcome of that was going to be. The show's going to open at the end of July. But through that process, I've learned a hell of a lot. And I think that as artists, our confidence, as creators, your confidence is really important, your self-confidence is really important. So really you have to believe in what you're doing.
And you can't hide in you can't hide in your art. Artists try to hide, but they can't hide. And the most poignant voices in the art world can see through you. And the most specialized collectors can also see through you.
Yes, because
they can see through the way you speak, they can see through your work, and it just is as it is, and at a certain point, I think that the feedback that you get from curators and from gallerists and from people like that and from collectors is really, really valuable, because it's a part of both personal growth and it's a part of your artistic growth. And to be really firm in who you are, really firm in your expression of who you are is very important, because like I said, you can't hide. You just can't hide.
I think as an artist it's very difficult.
Eventually the truth will come out and you will be exposed. So you may as well just expose yourself right up at the front.
And just be yourself as an artist.
Just be yourself and just be like, okay, here I am, this is who I am, and whether you like it or not, my intentions are clear. And
someone will connect with your work. So I wanted to just speak about religion in the art world generally, whether it's Christian or whether it's Judaism. It's always been contested. It's always been something that has kind of challenged people and made them feel uncomfortable. And I think again, the secularization of the art world is something that we should really look at, because that isn't a narrative that necessarily needs to be. And if you look at art history, art was very religious. So when you look at all of those things, I don't think it is just Islam. I think it's generally religion within the art space that makes people uncomfortable. But then there's many things that within art that make others feel uncomfortable, and being made to feel uncomfortable shouldn't be a reason not to produce art. I think we can wrap up there if anyone has any last comments maybe that you want to I think we've covered a lot, haven't we? We kind of went full circle and learned a lot from each other in that. I certainly did. I found that very, very a lot to process.
Thank you so much.